On Monday, the 31st of March 2014, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report saying much of the world remains unprepared for the mounting threats of climate change. 8 is the number of key risks that the IPCC feels are identified with high confidence, span sectors and regions. The world today faces two main problems: the economy and the environment. Some would suggest these two issues go hand in hand. What can be done here in Nigeria to avoid being victims of the predicted doom? Greening the economy is our focus today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I am Ayola Kasim. Almost 200 governments have agreed to limit warming to less than 2.0 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times, mainly by curbing emissions from burning fossil fuels. Temperatures have already risen by about 0.8 Celsius. Global warming poses a mounting threat to the health, economic prospects, food and water sources of billions of people, latest report by top scientists said, in a call for urgent action to counter the effect of carbon emissions. The climate scientists say they are more certain than ever before that mankind is the main culprit for global warming and warned the impact of greenhouse gas emissions would linger for centuries.
Climate change really is one of the defining challenges of the 21st century, and the IPCC is uniquely positioned to allow policymakers, all the way from individuals to international organizations, to deal effectively, robustly, and optimistically with a challenging future.
The latest report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change places an emphasis on the risks and may make the case for cutting greenhouse gas emissions clearer both to policymakers and the public by placing it in the category of an insurance policy for the planet. The time for action is now, according to the report, which follows an earlier assessment raising the probability that humans are responsible for global warming that is thought to cause droughts, colder weather, and rising sea levels. The occurrence of these disasters, which result from extreme climatic conditions, has become more frequent and widespread in recent times.
The one message that comes out very clearly is that the world has to adapt and the world has to mitigate. And the sooner we do that, the less the chances of some of the worst impacts of climate change being faced in different parts of the world.
In Nigeria, we face the risk of drought on our northern borders as desert conditions continue to encroach on our lands at an approximate speed of 1 kilometer per annum. Conversely, we contend with the issue of flooding in the ocean-bound southern areas as excessive amounts of rainfall, as well as a significant rise in the sea level, could have potential grave implications for lives and property.
The way nature has set things up, we are all interdependent. We breathe in oxygen, send out carbon dioxide, the trees take in carbon dioxide, send out oxygen. We have to maintain this balance. But because of our industrial activities and other polluting activities, we alter the balance, send too much carbon into the atmosphere, and all these have implications for movement for rain, for drought, causing droughts, movement of the currents in the oceans, which is really the machine that runs the climate. And then we think that we can solve all this by geoengineering and other false solutions to global warming, expensive solutions. I know the challenge for us is that many policymakers and those who work behind them see every crisis as an opportunity for business.
Considering the fact that climate change itself has been a direct result of negative human practices and activities over a prolonged period, the United Nations swung into action by putting the necessary machinery in place to bring a desirable change to the global environment. First, by helping to minimize those activities considered detrimental to the world. In its Green Economy reports, the United Nations Environment Programme argues the reason why there are so many global crises associated with climate change, food, energy and finance is because money was being invested in a brown economy, that is fossil fuels, instead of green sectors which focus on renewable energy. This is what UNEP calls an era of capital misallocation. UNEP claims that there will be just as much growth and more so in the long term if there is a shift to a green economy now. This requires spending $1.3 trillion a year from now until 2050. This will provide green jobs in areas like recycling and reduce poverty. It calls for the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, green taxes, and energy efficiency. UNEP says it is a myth to think there is a trade-off between economic progress and environmental sustainability. Where will all the funding needed come for all this? UNEP says public money should be used to encourage the private sector, who will provide the biggest chunk, to reallocate investments. Other sources will be innovative mechanisms like REDD+, which is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation.
Green is a very nice color, very nice word also. Everybody wants to be green. The brown wants to be green, the black wants to be green, the red wants to be green. And so what has happened with the United Nations formulation on green economy is actually the greening of the existing economy. And so it's not a revolutionary concept. It's not a concept that transforms. It's not a transformatory, if there's a word like that. It's not a transforming concept. It's a concept that just wants to pick what is already causing harm, intensify the harm, but make it look good. For example, the enthroning market environmentalism. So everything, the environment has to be placed on the market shelf. So trees release oxygen, so we can pay for the quantity of oxygen the trees producing. This is a service. That's one of it. We can talk about the REDD+ issue. You know, you come to see, okay, like this beautiful background here, the forest. All these trees they have a certain amount of carbon in them. And so if I could pay to keep this forest, which the local people would keep anyway, but somebody from Europe or North America comes here to pay for the forest, he now owns the carbon. So a forest is now seen as a carbon stock, not as a forest. And any kind of tree, plantations are seen as forests, which is a shame that a plantation can qualify as a forest. A tree can never make a forest, no matter how many of that tree you plant in a particular location. And so when you do that, it does not stop deforestation. That mechanism called reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation does not stop deforestation. At best, it could displace deforestation, because you secure one here, and then those who want to log go somewhere else. So there's something more fundamental that needs to be done, rather than just bring these things that make somebody feel good while polluting. So because somebody secures the amount of carbon stock in a particular set of trees in a particular forest, and it's equal to the amount of pollution that they are inflicting on the climate somewhere else, then they feel good. Also say, okay, my pollution is offset by the trees somewhere in Cross River State in Nigeria, and so I can keep polluting. And if I'm not polluting enough, I can sell polluting rights to somebody else somewhere else. So I make money, I feel good, and then I keep damaging the climate. It's simply not addressing the issue.
In practical terms, a green economy is one which depends on public and private investments that reduce carbon emissions and pollution, enhance energy and resource efficiency, and prevent the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. These investments need to be catalyzed and driven by targeted public expenditure, policy reforms, and regulation changes. But besides government input and the involvement of industries and corporate entities, the green economy also largely depends on the commitment and engagement of private citizens to get off the ground.
Green goes beyond environmental protection. Green, in a sense, means that ordinary citizens should have access to the economy and access to growth in Nigeria. We're having a different debate in Germany, where growth is a debatable concept. How many years can you grow your GDP? without spoiling the planet because you're taking too many resources. But in Nigeria, because so many people live in poverty, growth is really what everybody needs. But if we're now talking about green growth or a green economy, then we must take into account that this growth should be for ordinary Nigerians. Otherwise, you're just turning the current system into a green system. The current system benefits a small elite economically and doesn't favor the majority of Nigerians. Whether that is green or blue or yellow, I don't care, but Nigerians do not really benefit and participate in this growth. So from our perspective, we are looking for those practical examples where green technology or green concepts, environmentally friendly concepts, are also of benefit to ordinary Nigerians. And if you wish, I can give you a few examples of that. For example, we have done a research for Jigawa State, and we have looked at the usual budget that they put together, and we have drawn up a few just ad hoc examples of what greener development options Jigawa State would have. One of them being local production of organic fertilizer. There is a debate about fertilizer, we are aware of that, but we in the Heinrich Böll Foundation think that organic fertilizer has an important role to play. It cannot replace chemical fertilizer, but it has a much better environmental footprint. It doesn't contribute to global warming as the chemical fertilizer does through its production and its application. And also it really creates jobs. We calculated that the annual budget that Jigawa State spends on buying chemical fertilizer could be spent on, less than that, could be spent on building 5 organic fertilizer plants, create 1,300 jobs, and keep people close to the fertilizer. They would actually get it. I know the federal ministry is working very actively on reducing the scam, but still I think there are areas where fertilizer is hard to get by. If Jigawa State now creates these 5 plants with less than 1 year's worth of budget for chemical fertilizer, and creates those jobs, and farmers, especially women, have access to fertilizer, that is a good example of green economy. Then there are other examples. For example, especially in remote areas. Look at the whole north, northwest, north central, northeast, from Sokoto to Maiduguri. There is lack of water. The rainy season has shortened so much due to climate change that now you're relying on groundwater. The rainy season is not enough. Even if we had enough rain, there is not enough irrigation. So why don't we use the sun? Why don't we have a lot of solar-powered irrigation pumps? Again, in the case of Jigawa, we just calculated how much 10,000 diesel-powered irrigation pumps would have cost, and then we compared that with the 10,000 solar-powered irrigation pumps. Obviously, in the beginning, the solar ones are more expensive. However, if you calculate over 10 years, you can save 12 billion naira for the 10,000 pumps if you go solar. Because the solar needs, if it's the right model and a good quality pump, it hardly needs maintenance. It doesn't need diesel. And look at remote areas, sometimes without road. To get diesel is another wahala for them. So solar-powered irrigation pumps can stop the deserts, can make some areas green, can make areas productive, give youth employment, and cut out a lot of middlemen.